So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we can start. I would like to give a warm welcome to all of you and also to the people online. We have participants also following us online, so thank you for joining. My name is Monique Calisti. I'm the coordinator of the NGI Commons project that organized this event in close collaboration with the NGI unit here in DigiConnect. I'm also the CEO of Martel Innovate that is coordinating the project. We have a hashtag if you are making noise and reposting what's going on here. We really appreciate, because I think it's very important to create momentum and also to get feedback from people that could not be with us. So a couple of words about the project. How many people were not here yesterday? Okay, some people were not here yesterday, so I'll say in a few words, the NGI Commons is a Horizon Europe project financed by the European Commission. It's a 3-year project. We are more or less halfway, and what we're doing is we are analyzing and trying to create a roadmap together with key stakeholders active in the European scenario to make sure that digital commons and their inclusion in the next framework program will pave the way to build and ensure an autonomous digital backbone for Europe. Without any further ado, we will pass to the technical discussions with my colleague Carolina, but first, please switch on the phones or the mobile phones in silent mode. And I'd like to remind you that we cannot bring food and coffee in this room. Water, yes, but not the rest. Thank you very much. And before leaving the floor to Carolina, that will run the next session, I would like to remind you that yesterday we had an intense afternoon. Very interesting discussions. We had several players, representatives of the European Parliament, of the Commission, but also experts from various organizations, public, private, academics, SMEs. And I think the dialogue is very important, and I would really appreciate if we can have interactive sessions. So we'll try to give the floor also to the audience and to make sure that you can ask questions, and our moderators will pull you into discussions. So many thanks, and I leave the floor to Carolina that will take over. Thank you.
Good morning. Can I please ask our distinguished speakers to come and join me here? So we have Sebastian Reibel from Apple. We have Jordan Maris, EU policy analyst at the Open Source Initiative. We have Enzo Ribagnac, director for policy at ZISPE, Cloud Infrastructure Service Providers in Europe. And we have Florian Schuck, policy officer at Digital SME Alliance. Welcome, gentlemen. So, to start, I would like to follow up on what was discussed yesterday. We had a rich afternoon full of interesting discussion, yet quite high level. We heard from Benjamin Bogle from the cabinet of EVP Hanna Virkkunen that with the digital commons, you can be sovereign yet open at the same time. And it aligns well with the EU vision. So we're all on the same board. Then we have heard from Fabrizia Benini from the NGI unit that it's no longer about if, but how we deploy open source and digital commons services in the institutions. Bartek and Emma here spoke about how the edict is going to help the digital commons. And then Sachiko and Sophie called for a change in the words we're using and for a culture change. And then Adriana Groh spoke about policy by doing and by, finally delivering the results. So today, I want to look at how do we deliver the results. How can we actually do this? And I would like to focus on the concrete policies that need to change in order for the public authorities to use digital commons and open source more. So I'll be asking how. to start, I would like to ask you to raise your hand if you have experience with public procurement. Okay, so a few, but maybe a lesser half, I would say. Okay, is your experience, please raise your hand if your experience is as a seller. The one who sells the goods. Okay, and 3. And if your experience is as a buyer, so representative of the public. Okay, so not much. I personally also don't have experience with buying or selling, for public institutions, but I have a sort of a personal story for you. So when I started working on the NGI Commons project, I asked my dad, who runs the IT services for the Czech government. And, he's the type of person who installed Thunderbird and Linux on my computer when I was a teenager, which I rebelled against. It was 20 years ago. And, I asked him now, so why don't you use open source more in the government? And he answered, it's half illegal and half impossible. So with this very optimistic start, I would like to hear from our distinguished speakers. What do you think are the 3 biggest hurdles for the public sector to use digital commons more? Just 3 words. Okay. 3 words. Sebastian.
3 words each.
Yes.
So I think it's a lot of knowledge that's necessary, of trust, and
2 are enough.
I'll go with 2 then.
So thank you, Sebastian, for giving me time to think. I think procurement is the first, training is the second, and mindset, I think, is the third.
I had even more time to think, but you stole my last one. I think legal framework is one. Mindset, you said already. No, did you? You did, so I'm not going to say it. Skills, and I'm going to repeat mindset. It doesn't matter. I don't find something else. I think it's the right one.
Okay, I'm in the best position. So I would say, coming from my perspective, lock-in, legacy, and perhaps market, whatever that means.
Okay. Now, before we dive deeper into procurement, if you remember the words you have mentioned, how can this be solved? You can pick one that you mentioned that's maybe closest to your heart, and just to start off the discussion. How will you solve this?
I mean, nobody's starting, so I'll take it. So my favorite one is legacy. So I think I'll just steal yours. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think the legal framework is 2 words, but that's the one I would mention. You mentioned your father saying it's half illegal. I don't know if it's illegal in Czech Republic, but I think a change of legal framework would lead to the possibility of having more digital commons, open source components, open source solutions, open source businesses, procuring to governments. At the moment, the legal framework that we have at the European level, at least, that is then followed at the national level, just doesn't enable or empower open source solution, despite the fact that it definitely leads to more digital sovereignty. And I think this yesterday afternoon, the discussion was focusing on this, so that'd probably be what I would say about the legal framework itself.
Orion?
Yeah. So I would pick lock-in maybe, because I think we all know that we have a problem with lock-in in our digital economy, and the public sector is no exception. Even this very house is locked into some non-EU providers, that there are various practices or various reasons for why this lock-in persists. Some of them are bundling, some of them are the appropriate training. People don't want to change just software that they have been using for 20 plus years. And because there are a bunch of reasons, there are also a bunch of remedies. I think the legal framework was touched upon by Enzo already. I think the revision of the public procurement directives will bring an opportunity for this to somehow enable some incentives, some industrial policy approaches to change the lock-in and to change the dependence in Europe that we have. But ultimately, what we can really do and choose now in Europe is to start building our own sovereign tech stack. And in that way, we don't have to rely on the same handful of providers for our IT services.
So I'm going to go with mindset, and there are a couple of reasons. The first is sometimes there's a fear of doing things in-house or doing things yourself, which we should get rid of. The cloud is necessary and amazing, but that doesn't mean as well that you can't deploy yourself to the cloud, that you can't have your own engineers do things. Everybody likes to have things bundled up into a nice, easy package that they don't have to think about, which is fair enough. But I think the second is we have to dispense with this notion that open source is second best to proprietary software. Because, I mean, have any of you used Microsoft Teams recently? Come on, it's like we are not second best anymore, and so we need to dispense with this sort of kind of old logic that open source isn't as good, that open source isn't as reliable. We've been seeing outages across the tech sector for the last year and a half, which are frankly appalling, and we've been seeing products getting less and less good, proprietary products getting less and less good, while open source is quietly but steadily improving. So I think we need to change the mindset. We need people to understand that just because it's free between quotation marks, very big quotation marks, it doesn't mean that it's not as good. In fact, it can often mean that it's better.
So just to remind you, I said knowledge and trust, and now I took the opportunity of going last so I could think a little bit about what I said more. And I've come to the conclusion in these couple of minutes that knowledge and trust are really the same, right? We're trying to raise awareness. We're trying to create more legal certainty for public authorities that want to use open source. And I think that connects very well also to what your dad said, that it's half illegal, half impossible. I think we needed some time to learn that it's not legal to use open source or to even make procurement choices where we say we only want to procure, we only will procure open source. That is definitely possible, and it's also within the legal framework. But the knowledge about that is still lacking, and I think also the way to take there is something that could be much clearer for procurers, and that is something that the EU can definitely work on.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I don't think we can, sort of solve the lock-in or the mindset from here, for policy and analysts behind the table. So let's dive into the legal framework and the legal framework for public procurement. It's sort of what I see it can drive the change because it can serve as inspiration for others, right, when the public authorities start. But apparently there is a need to make it easier for them. We heard yesterday that, for example, they need a service provider, somebody they can call when, the button doesn't work. So, and nobody turning it off and on doesn't work. So who do you call, right? That's one thing. But so why do you think is public procurement needed, and how sort of should it be changed to help the digital commons without, going into the public procurement directive, which we'll talk about later? So now on the sort of surface level. Why is it needed, and how should it be changed? Jordan, do you want to start?
Sure, with pleasure. So, why is public procurement needed? I'm going to try and keep it to my domain, which is, really more open source community work. And as a lot of people will know, we do have a bit of a sustainability problem in open source, right? There is a struggle to find the money needed to pay developers, because yes, developers should be paid to do what they do. And I see public procurement of open source solutions in part as a solution to that problem. And I think that we should be encouraging open source projects to launch companies and start doing things. I will leave the company stuff to Sebastian, because that's his area of expertise. But the second thing that I want to add is the public procurement system was made for a century that is dead, for a period of time which is completely dead, when we had allies across the Atlantic, which we felt very comfortable with and which we trusted. And we don't live in that century anymore. So if there's one thing that I could say we need to change, it's we need to change public procurement to take into account the need for trust in the software that we use. And I have a friend who repeatedly says, you can choose to trust open source software, but you have to trust proprietary software. Because if you don't, then it's running on your infrastructure. You have no idea how it works. At least with open source, you can know. So that's what I'll start with.
So I guess the question of who to call when the button doesn't work, that is something that the open source business ecosystem is really able to provide, because that is literally the business model of the open source firms. Open source is a sphere where essentially the core product that you procure, that you get, is provided to you on the basis of that open source license. So it mostly comes free, but the services around it and making it work, integrating it into your infrastructure, or making it work with your product, is really the question where open source providers come in and where businesses are providing their services. So I see a bit of a need for more integration, for more product, for an easier accessibility to an integrated stack of product that you are then able to procure if you're a public procurement authority, or to buy in the public sector, and connecting to what was said before about how procurement can really be a lever for open source to thrive and to improve the product that we're looking at. I think we shouldn't underestimate it. We as open source businesses are looking for possibility to sell to the private sector, and that is what is currently massively lacking. And public procurement can deliver that knowledge for the products that we provide, the trust in the reliability and security of these products, and also the investment into the technology that is being provided. So who you're going to call, please call the open source businesses.
You said that the possibility to sell to public sector is lacking. Why do you think it's lacking? Why is the public not interested to buy from open source?
A lot of the time because of, I think, the establishment of the proprietary solutions that we're all so well versed with. A lot of the time because this is what we're already taught from school on, right? I grew up with using Microsoft products in school. Yesterday it was said way too often, but you don't get fired for procuring IBM. You don't get fired for buying Microsoft. So I think those are the things that keep private buyers from going there.
Thank you. So if we can go back to the why is public procurement needed question, Enzo.
Yeah. So maybe I think I should step back and explain a bit what CISPE is about, so that I can explain for us why it matters. So CSPA stands for Cloud Infrastructure Services Provider in Europe. That's a very long name to say that we gather IaaS providers. And there is an issue on the market on the infrastructure as a service model, which is European companies compared to foreign players are tiny. So if they want to compete, how do they do it? If we talk about public procurement, how do you, as an SME, manage to compete with an enormous company that is capable of scaling much more than you are, capable of giving a wide variety of services that you might not be able to because you're an SME and you're still developing? And the solution that our members came with is open source. And the reason I was saying maybe I should step back and explain a bit what CSPA does. CSPA is an organization that does open source projects, advocacy, compliance, and legal actions. And one of the open source projects that our members told and asked us to invest in, and we invested 1 million in that project, is called Fulcrum. It's an open source project that belongs to a foundation called the Intercloud Exchange Foundation. And the idea of this project is that through an open source component, you can gather and federate small providers, cloud providers, so that you can answer together a large contract, a large tender, a large public procurement call. And our members, SME mostly, if I think it's 60% now at the moment, if not 58 or something like that, they can't win those contracts without an open source project that enables them to federate. And so if your question is why do we need open source in public procurement? Because without open source in public procurement, those SMEs by definition are kicked out of the process. They cannot procure to government because the contracts are too big. And we need to figure out a way to bring them at the same table. And open source is the solution for that. So for us, that's really the angle that we take. Open source as an empowering tool, as an enabler of our companies and an enabler of digital sovereignties, because due to different capital market in Europe and in foreign countries, companies cannot scale in Europe as much that we scale in other countries. So we need open source to rebalance that situation and that lack of capital market union, or whatever we would call it in the EU if we had an actual market of capital.
Thank you. Florian, what do the digital SMEs think about this?
Yeah, since Enzo took the opportunity, I will also quickly say a few words about my organization. So we represent 45,000 SMEs across Europe in the tech sector, and we also do mostly helping them to comply, helping them access funding projects, but also advocacy. And I think when asked to your question, why is public procurement needed, I think that's almost self-explanatory. Well, no one needs to be convinced about the need for digital sovereignty anymore. I think we even had a whole full-blown European summit this week in Berlin about the topic. And if we make ourselves, if we look at that public procurement represents 14% of the EU's GDP each year, that's a huge opportunity. And I think the one thing, if I had to change anything, is to use public procurement more as an industrial policy tool and not just as a task that governments have to do necessarily to, be functional. There's a huge opportunity there. I know we will go into the directives later, but design them in a way that benefits the interests of the EU's economy most. And currently, we don't do that enough. And open source and the commons can play a huge part in that.
I like that. Can you elaborate on that? How would you exactly, change public procurement policies in order to make them industrial policies with the notion that, it's still in the hands of the member states?
So I think the directives have some wiggle room there, and we will see what the negotiations will bring, or even the proposal of the Commission in the first place. But I think we need to move beyond the price criterion as the number one criterion. So I think a good example for that is the cloud sovereignty framework that was released a few weeks ago by Digit. the Commission's IT service, which lays out different criteria for cloud solutions to have them at the level of sovereignty. So what they do is they define a minimum level of sovereignty that every solution in this tender needs to reach. And then on top of that, they define a sovereignty score that flows into the evaluation of the different products, of the different solutions and offers, alongside quality, price, reliability, and so on. So if you define things like, technical sovereignty, how much control remains, with the provider, which is in Europe, or with the public authority, the data localization, data sovereignty, where does the data go, and things like that, headquarters and all this. Then you can already start to direct the market towards a certain way. Because if the public sector, if the Commission, if the member states procure things that are a certain way, then the market will follow. And I think that is the first step towards using public procurement as an industrial policy tool.
Thank you. So we've sort of come naturally to the EU Public Procurement Directive that's being, revisioned as we speak. Do your organizations have position on how should we be changed and what exactly should be changed during the revision in the directive? Thank you.
Yes, I can start. So yes, we published a position paper on that in September already, but of course the process will still take a while. I think they just started the next consultation on the new proposal. So I think the number one thing for us is to define clear criteria for European preference. I think that's what we've always been saying. As I just explained, along different dimensions of sovereignty, headquarters, legal, immunity from extraterritorial jurisdiction, data sovereignty, and so on. Another thing is that I think we can put more emphasis on rewarding solutions that are interoperable, that can be federated. I think the cloud market, one of the weaknesses of the European cloud market, and so knows more about this, is that there's a lot of fragmentation, and this is why the European cloud providers are too small to compete with the scale of the hyperscalers. So rewarding federation, incentivizing interoperability is the first step towards building a real alternative that can be used by both the public and the private sector.
And so since he mentioned you.
Yes, thank you for mentioning me. So in CISPE, we've been working on this for a very long time. Funnily enough, when I was preparing this panel, I went into the different documents, and the first advocacy or policy document that I found from CISPE on public procurement was 10 years ago, asking the exact same thing that everybody is saying we should be doing now. So I think we're not reinventing anything. It's not like nobody knows. So what I would say is I invite you to just Google CISPE and public procurement, and you will find very, very long guidance on how to run procurement so that you can give advantage to specific companies and support the European market and fight fragmentation, et cetera, et cetera. You mentioned, federating providers, cloud market. There are 3 points that we think are necessary, at least for public procurement, to give an advantage to open solution, interoperable solution, federation of providers, digital commons, open source. The first one is to avoid the one-stop shop. So now it feels like when we want to do public procurement, we want to buy from only one provider. Done. It's fast, easy, quick. We do it. We sign the contract. It's over. Of course, public procurement has a lot of rules. It's not easy. It's not over very quickly. But it's so complex that we go for the easy one. We sign one contract, one-stop shop, and it's done, which is not in favor of interoperability by definition. And because there is no interoperability requirement within the procurement call, then by definition, it doesn't really matter. We do one-stop shop. It's not interoperable with anyone, and the market is impacted by this because of the high numbers of spending of public sector in typically cloud services. So that's the first one. The second one is to enable equivalency. Sometimes it feels like in procurement, we already know what we want and we're going to buy that solution. We just do the procurement because that's the procedure. But because we don't enable equivalency, it means that a provider that doesn't have the exact same solution cannot win because it's just not equivalent. They don't enable that equivalency. And finally, we need to know and be aware and want it. It's going to cost money. We are completely locked in, at least on the cloud market. Switching is going to have a cost. And we need to accept the fact that switching is going to have a cost. We've been in a situation for the last 10, 20 years. Now, if we want to get rid of that situation, if we want to be more sovereign, if we want to have more interoperability, then getting out of those companies that have been locking us in for 20 years is going to cost a bit of money. And supporting that interoperability is going to cost a bit of money. Supporting digital commons is going to cost a bit of money. So we need to accept that. So avoid one-stop shop, accept equivalence, and accept the fact that it's going to cost a bit of money, and that switching cost is going to be something for the next 5 years at least.
So I'm also going to hijack this to take a moment to introduce myself and my organization, as my colleagues have already done. So I'm Jordan Maris. I'm the EU Policy Officer for the Open Source Initiative. We're an international organization pretty much who kind of look after the definition of open source. So I'm not going to talk about European preference because we're such an international organization. However, we have submitted feedback already on the Public Procurement Directive, and there are loads and loads of things that could be changed. I'd also love to talk more about the benefits of changing the directive so that it can allow for open source participation. But I will say, the things that we should obviously do is consider interoperability as a criteria. We wouldn't go as far as imposing open source. But I think that just by doing that, considering interoperability, reusability, the potential for vendor lock-in, the ability to move your data and to move your service from a cloud to another cloud, maybe even on premises if needed, things like this are very, very important, and they're currently not taken into consideration in the process. Obviously, something to do with trust and sovereignty is also a good idea. I don't know what form that could take yet. But those are some of the ideas that we have floated to address some of these problems.
Can I ask you, before I give the word to Sebastian, can I ask you how would you build the trust? Because that's something that takes time.
Well, we don't have time. And the very good news is the trust, and again, we're a very international organization, but I will call a spade a spade. Europe's trust in the United States is crashing faster than its trust in open source is growing. But at some point, the lines are going to cross, right? And open source is going to be considered more trustworthy. Now, we're still probably quite far away from that, but I suspect we're naturally coming towards it. I also think that we're seeing, and I will leave this to Sebastian, but we're seeing increased adoption of open source technologies in the public sector, in particular in Germany, but elsewhere too. And there are some amazing companies building some amazing technologies. So, yes, that's for Sebastian.
Not an easy position to take the last one in this very good row that has already filled my sheet here with points that I want to talk about. But maybe first of all, Appel is a member-based organization. We represent the open source business associations in the different member states, and here in Brussels, I represent them as kind of the umbrella organization. And there are not only some inputs that we've given to the public consultation back in February, was it? But also from our member organizations that have been preparing in Germany in particular for the reform of that was foreseen once for the public procurement framework there. That very much also can inform the European public procurement revision. And I think importantly, what we have to tell public authorities, but also what we have to tell the private sector, is that we cannot compete merely on price. I discourage my member companies from competing on price, and that should not be the sole criteria also for public procurement to look at procuring open source, because that functional equivalence may be there, but the integration is sometimes still lacking, and in order to fix that, we have to also cost the same. So open source is free, but it is not less costly than the proprietary solutions that you've funneled investments into for decades. And so it would be wrong for public authorities or private buyers to be looking at this as an opportunity to save a lot of money. Not in the first place. In the long run, yes, because it is the more sustainable investment. And since the number has been set before that it's 14% of GDP, it is also 60% of IT budgets that public procurement gives, and that is a huge opportunity for the businesses to build that product that is really needed in the public and private sector. The cloud sovereignty framework was mentioned, and of course, this is a good opportunity for the scoring and measuring of where we are as European member states, as public authorities, and as private buyers. I think we will land at a place where we realize that open source is quite international in how it's being built, with most of the developers, according to some statistics, in Europe, and that is really the point to be making when procuring open source, when giving your trust to open source. You have this ecosystem in Europe that has been a bit left behind and not been in the very public eye. So it is time to actually give that trust to the ecosystem that is building what is the foundation of 90% of software. And I challenge everyone in the room to produce one of the devices that you're using that doesn't use open source either as a component or even as the main operating system, or at least in the very development of the software that it's using. There is always an open source component that is relied on, and I think this amounts to 100%. I will close there.
Thank you very much. So, back when I used to work in public affairs, I learned that the easiest thing to do when you want to get some change done is to write up the amendment and give it to the policymakers. So if you were writing the amendment for the directive, or then the following implementation in the member states, what would you change? One thing. Would you write up? I know Florian would write up the criteria. Would there be something else that you could change?
If there's one thing that I would write, I think I'll choose the annex and add a standard contract or standard contractual terms that can be used in procurement, because, as I was saying in the very beginning, a lot of it is the knowledge and the awareness of how to procure open source. And the second amendment would be OSPOs.
Jordan, do you want to?
I already agree with what's been said on both sides, so I don't have that much to add. Perhaps some nice recitals saying how great open source is, always appreciated.
And so do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I think, so I'm thinking out loud right now, because I think it's a very complex text itself, so, changing an amendment can have a lot of impact. Maybe a recital is easier. At least we take less risks. Something that promotes interoperability and openness of systems, and promote, I mentioned before, not a one-stop shop. It's the same thing. If you don't want to have a one-stop shop, you need interoperability. So it's the same thing. The point is to say interoperable solution, but public procurement directive applies to more than just cloud services, but something that enables the interoperability within digital services that promotes the interoperability. I think it was said before, and I know your question is very is a very concrete one, but Brussels talk a lot about Brussels effect, right? We do regulation better than everyone, and then after that we influence the entire world. Great. Why don't we use public procurement to do that? Why don't we use public procurement so that we develop a policy and we develop a market that would influence the world? I don't get it. I don't get why you have countries around the world that manage to have preferences for specific elements that they consider is important, the market and the technology to have, and we don't do it with public procurement. We want to have Brussels effect. Brussels effect also goes through public procurement. You influence your market, you influence your technologists, and by that you influence the technology that the entire world will be using and that the market will be using. And that's the Brussels effect too. And there is no reason why the public procurement shouldn't have a Brussels effect, that we shouldn't impact the market. And so putting openness, putting interoperability, federating cloud services as requirements that could be in public procurement and therefore recognized by the Public Procurement Directive is a way to have that Brussels effect, is a way to influence technology, is a way to promote open source and openness on the market. So that's what I would change. I don't know if it's a recital or if it's an article.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, I'm going to be a pain and add something. So the criteria are the most important thing, but there is a criteria that we haven't talked about, which I think that we should be talking about, and this should definitely be in the articles. So one of the issues that I've heard from people in the open source space is that often these requests for standards rely on a technology which is patent encumbered. And that basically rules out open source from the beginning, right? We can't procure the patents for these things. We can't buy the right to use these things. So that locks people out from the beginning. So I think that we should prohibit within the public procurement requests. I can't think of the correct term. Prohibit requirements for patented technologies, and similarly prohibit requirements for proprietary software. And I think until we do that, we're going to be stuck with the lock-in problem, which we've had up until now, and which is still probably one of the biggest barriers.
Maybe I can, yeah. So I want to say that I support what Enzo said about the Brussels effect for public procurement. I think that's the spirit we have to go for. When it comes to amendments, let me preface by saying I'm not a lawyer. So I wouldn't dare to draft these amendments. I studied economics, so I understand the relationships, but I don't understand how to formulate amendments in a way that doesn't backfire.
Okay, we'll do it together.
Working group. Yes. So, but I, as you said, I already mentioned the criteria. I mentioned incentivizing federation interoperability. I have a lot more ideas in our position paper. Some of them involve decreasing or increasing the amount of smaller lots we offer in public tenders in order to work against the bundling strategy of the incumbents, to incentivize pre-commercial procurement, to incentivize the state working together with SMEs to develop new innovative technologies instead of just relying on what is there. And also a thing that I think we need to target is in-house procurement. I think that is a killer for the private market because it basically locks out the entire private market that also provides services to other businesses. So reducing that in some way would be another step on the way. But yeah, all of those things. But the priority for us is definitely the European preference criteria.
Thank you. So there is a lot of talk about, the 28th regime. Do you think if we had EU-wide status for the digital commons or for a product, that's federated, that's interoperable, how would this, what would be the legal status, the legal entity? Would there be one? Would you need to change that? That you would have one body to go to?
I think so. Yes, I mean, we definitely support the 28th regime. I think it's a great initiative to harmonize company law across the continent. I haven't thought much about the relationship between the 20th regime and public procurement, if I'm honest. We good?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so this would be a good step, but maybe you can concretize what you mean by the question for my later speakers.
So this is also a bit of a problem. So for background, both Sebastian and I previously worked in the Parliament, and we worked on a lot of laws which involve regulating things, and that regulation sort of spills over into open source naturally. And one of the big issues that we continually run into is that most open source is not a product on the market, and almost all EU regulations regulate products on the market, right? So up until now, we've had this sort of hodgepodge approach, depending on the law, depending on the issue, where we carve open source out, and this has been the case in the Product Liability Directive recently. It's the case in the Cyber Resilience Act, and I don't doubt for a moment that it will be the case in a bunch more regulations. It's also the case in the AI Act. So I think part of the problem is also, and I don't have an answer to this, and I think the answer might also vary depending on the law, asking ourselves the question of, okay, well, to what extent should, community-based open source, which has not got a business behind it, be covered by the law, be regulated? I personally think relatively little. Though, I mean, having worked now on the CRA, I've seen quite an appetite from people in the open source community to make small changes to make their product more compliant or closer to compliance. So I don't know. I think that open source is going through a bit of a coming of age as well in that sense. More and more developers are professionalizing their open source projects, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing for open source sustainability. And we still have this question hanging over us of, when does a community open source project become something that is a product on the market? And I think we have to work that out, but I think it's a very difficult question. And again, it depends on what we're regulating, right?
Jordan has already said it. I also used to work in the European Parliament, not a lawyer either. I did write a lot of amendments, so I'm a computer scientist by trade. I think what you need for that is a lot of openness to understanding the system and a bit of experience in how the framework of the law looks for the particular case you're looking at. I'm not sure how the 28th regime can help. I understand that some people say that it could help when it comes to financing of products or of businesses, but I'm afraid more than that I can't say. I guess in terms of when it comes to the vertical integration and the creation of product, the approaches that we see in Germany with Zendis, for example, and in France with Denum, that are different approaches, but they try to integrate solutions into one product. And the building of consortia, maybe that could also happen at European level with the 28th regime.
And so when you're integrating and federating the cloud providers into one project, how do you then approach them, for example, for taxation issues?
Great question. Thank you. So you don't have to. Because you can still have only one entity contracting. That's the beauty of it. So I give you a perfect example. European Commission has a contract of 180 million. It was mentioned by the Commission yesterday. They have to follow something called the Cloud Sovereignty Framework. Everybody has an opinion about it. It's not why I'm saying this, but out of this, you can have 4 contracts, right? So if I do quickly, it's 45 million per contract. one entity, one of our member, the member A, would be using doesn't have enough power or infrastructure to reply to the contract by itself, but still answer because these specific companies know that there are 5-10 other companies that are leveraging Fulcrum. Thanks to Fulcrum, they'd be able to manage and buy infrastructure services from others that they will be able to manage by themselves directly. So there is no need for taxation or whatever. It's one company that, thanks to Fulcrum, can leverage the others and federate the others in a way that the others will be paid what they want to be paid, and they will manage the workload directly on their own control panel if they need to. So for that specific project, that specific federation that is enabled by the project called Fulcrum project, that I invite everyone to Google again, because it's really a cool project and I really like it, then you wouldn't have to. Honestly, I think your question is the perfect question in the sense that it really explained that it's not complex, it's not complicated. Thanks to an open source project, you finally managed to solve a problem that the market couldn't solve by itself because we didn't have enough capital for our companies to scale. And so, yeah, we don't need specific unit or entity or whatever to manage such contracts. It's simple.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. I would now like to give a floor to you. Please, if you have any question, raise your hand. So, Zuza and then Francisco. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So thank you for the discussion. I found it very interesting. This is something we're also working on quite a lot, on how making the procurement work for digital commons. But I want to challenge a little bit what you, Enzo, said about the avoiding one-stop shop. I think in theory that's a great idea, but we're sort of in a paradoxical situation because when we talk about how we want to regulate cloud and what sort of cloud we need, we talk about unbundling, we talk about structural separation. But then so that's the supply side, but then on the demand side, we have to be pragmatic, and the reality is that purchasing offices need simple solutions. And then and this is where the need for bundling and for, as you said yourself, consortia providing this way of a one-stop shop come into play. So I think we need to find a bit of a balance between these. And of course, bundles can be different things, right? You can have a bundle provided by AWS, or you can have a bundle provided by a group of open source companies working together. But I think it's important to remember that many of these contracts come, from what I understand, for example, City of Amsterdam has one contract for IT services, right? So, yeah, and of course, that we should try to challenge that and cut it into smaller pieces, but that's the reality in which we're functioning. But my question is actually about the glorious cloud sovereignty framework. I'd be curious to hear your opinions on this and to what extent you feel like it's going in the right direction or not. I think CISPE published on this, so I sort of expect what you might say, but I'd be also curious to hear from the other participants because if I remember correctly, open source is not mentioned even once in that whole framework.
Thank you. So I think when you talk about bundling, you talk about two different things, and we need to be very careful when we talk about bundling. You mentioned companies. I don't mention companies because I don't think it's necessary. Everybody knows who I'm talking about. No, bundling is not good. Bundling in a sense of forced bundling, in a sense that the customer has no choice but to use another service that you sell in a different contract if they use another service of yours. This, small, big, whatever, it's not good. You remove freedom from the customer is not able to change.
Right, but that's lock-in, that's not bundling.
That is also bundling services. You bundle services, and the lock-in is the consequence of the bundling. So here, I guess what I'm trying to say is not that you're wrong or whatever. What I'm trying to say is bundling for public services or public sector or private sector is always wrong. I see where you're going with the fact that it needs to be simple for the customer, but the fact that one can think that bundling is necessary for a good customer experience is technically wrong. if you have openness of your service and you make sure that your service is open, and I would even say it's not that you have to make sure that your service is open, is that you should forbid people to make sure that the service is not open, because that's what they do on purpose. So here is the point that I would answer to that specific point. Not to say that you're wrong, I say just bundling in my mouth means something different than what you meant. So that's what I meant, the forced bundling for a customer to only use another service when buying another service. And so for the one-stop shop, typically, you can buy from one company, but that one company would be leveraging services from 5 different providers. So here there is no bundling. You can have a one provider that would give you a big contract, and then they will use a specific drive from a specific company, a specific mailing service from a specific company, a specific video platform from another provider. And here there's no bundling. It would be one contractor that resells or reproduce different open source projects or different products from different companies that are managed by other companies. And here there's no bundling, but still one contract. Now, on the sovereignty framework, the criteria inside the sovereignty framework are not really the problem for our members. The problem is the idea that you can have a percentage of sovereignty which reduces the readability of what is sovereign and what is not sovereign. This is the biggest issue at the moment. Everybody is calling themselves sovereign. There is no definition of sovereign for cloud market. I don't want to enter into all the other markets. There's also sovereign agriculture, blah, blah. I don't want to enter into this. When it comes to cloud services, the problem is any company in the world now has a VP for sovereignty. And sovereign cloud this, sovereign cloud that, they come, they have a Spanish accent, and that's enough for it to be a sovereign service. No. The point is to say, what is a sovereign service? And in a sovereign service, that should have a specific definition. And when you give the ability to have a score, then all of a sudden a foreign company with a Spanish VP with an accent can have a 75% sovereignty, while an SME that maybe has less way of managing their supply chain, their sustainability as well in the sovereignty framework. Trust me, I'm all for sustainability, but maybe we need a sustainability framework that also needs to be taken into account when buying cloud services, that is next to it, more precise, more important. And so all of a sudden, this company, because they're less sustainable or they control less their supply chain, they don't have enough to have stocks that will give them the freedom in the long term to manage the operation in case there is a cut-off from a specific government that says you don't have access to chips anymore. They will have a lower score, and they will have 73% on the sovereignty score, or even if they have more, say that a foreign company has 75 and a European company has 82. What does it say about the market? Now, all of a sudden, I'm a buyer, and I can say, okay, I want to buy a sovereign service. This one is 82, but it's 20% more expensive than the one at 75%, so I'm buying the one at 75%. No, there is sovereign and there is not sovereign. So I guess that's where my members and our members are saying the framework actually doesn't help, because it doesn't give a binary way to say, okay, you're sovereign, you're not sovereign, and I'm buying only if you have that certification. So in CISPE, what we think is that we should recognize certification from the market the same way that we do with GDPR. GDPR has code of conduct. CISPE has a GDPR code of conduct. You pass the GDPR code of conduct that is recognized by a data protection authority. Ours is recognized by the Data Protection Authority of France. And then if you use that the GDPR code of conduct, you're certified by an independent body. The independent body will audit your company, your servers, your employees, etc., and they will say, okay, now you follow the GDPR code of conduct of CISPE, recognized by the CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority. Therefore, you're compliant with GDPR. Same thing for sovereignty. You recognize a specific framework for sovereignty. You audit it by a third party that's independent. It gives you the certification, the stamp that says you're sovereign. Boom, you can answer to sovereignty public procurement calls, and that's done. But if you don't do this, if you have percentage of this, percentage of that, then the market will remain the same that it is. Everybody would call themselves sovereign, and nobody will be sovereign or knowing whether or not they are, and the consumers will be misled.
Wow. I would have a follow-up question on that, but I give the floor to you as I promised. There were some questions in the back. Yes, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi. Can I go ahead? Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Francesco from Blender. So I have it's a question thought. I heard that you can say thoughts as well, not just questions. So I'll just take one minute to say the topic of procurement. So with Blender, we do kind of deal with the topic of procurement, especially when working with very large companies. And, the question, who do we call? who is going to help me when the software doesn't work? That's like very often it's like more of a management question than a user question. Blender is a tool for a lot of things. A lot of creatives use it. Creatives don't need to call anyone. They figure things out themselves unless things are really bad. And the answer that we give, or what we try to do like as a strategy, is to make sure that in the company that adopts the software, there is people with enough expertise to handle 90% of the issues, and then are able to escalate and connect, not just with the project, but with everybody else. Because the nice thing about having an open source project is that we have public support, quote, channels, where everybody can help each other. And that's a thing that companies have a hard time understanding very often, because they're just like, no, I just want to call the support number and then they will tell me what to do. And what we really try to push back on, and to a certain extent manage, is like dedicate a person, hire a person in your company that is going to do the support. You hire them yourself. Like the money that you would spend in a contract, support contract, you spend in getting a skilled, smart developer that can figure these things out. And I think that, when you are thinking about like the regulation and all this procurement regulation, I think it would be very interesting, and I don't know if you guys, agree with this, but to actually define this a little bit better. So because when you're talking about these companies that need procurement, they're huge. So they can certainly afford to hire people that can do that kind of job. It's just a strategic decision that you make. And I think that could actually have a very good impact, because then you spread this support among everybody, and then still everybody can connect to each other and help each other. So you don't put it on the open source project, you don't put it on like forcing an open source project to build a support strategy. For example, with Blender, we really try not to do that, because then you end up selling support instead of making your product, because doing good support business is a problem of its own, is not making good software, and then everybody can be happy. So I don't know if you guys agree with this, and if you think...
Thank you for your thought. Francesca, Sebastian would like to answer.
Thank you so much. I really liked the points that you were making, and that they ended in a question. I think the who you gonna call question is the easy answer is create that knowledge in-house. Have somebody that is an expert in-house, and for public authorities, but also in the private sector, that can often take the form of an open source program office, of an OSPO, that understands the ecosystem, that knows the products that are out there. And the fact that often, I've been saying it quite a lot, that we need this integration, because it's easier to sell product that is already integrated, and where you don't have to know the individual names. But that's not something that everybody can do. And also that diversity of the open source ecosystem and of the businesses that are often SMEs, is in particular in Europe in the IT sector, that are mostly SMEs. This diversity of players is a strength of Europe. And of the European ecosystem that we can leverage, that we can use to also increase European competitiveness. So building OSPOs that know the individual players, that know how to talk to them and make them work together, but also from our side, creating more consortia and working together on product that is actually usable. I think that is the way to go forward, and that is also for both public and private sector to take back value creation in-house.
And then the lady in the back.
Hi, I'm Sarah de Husch. I'm the Director of Social Economy Europe, so nothing to do with our, that is technological a priori. So for those who don't know what social economy is, it's basically associations, foundations, mutuals, cooperatives, social enterprises that are all agree on developing activity where first you have the social objective before profit, you reinvest profit in the social objective, and you have democratic governance. And there is in the values a lot of things that are common with this world, and we really plead for a digital world that is closer to our values, and this is the one. But so two things actually. The first comments I wanted to make is that when I see that, for example, what you were asking for in public procurement, we have a lot of things in common. We are also for going away from the cheapest bid. We are also about putting it into smaller lots, and also about promoting an economy that stays on the territory for the people and for the communities. So I think that there's some alliances we could do here, because we are not a lot of actors that are proning that. And so if we come together, I think it could be it could have a strong effect. So this is an invitation after the coffee break, because after the coffee break I have to leave for a side talk. But just to come back on what you were saying, I would love to move away from Microsoft and so on, but somebody said it. The EU market is more than 90% small and medium enterprises who just can't afford that, and even small, less than 10 employees. And these companies and organizations, it's hard to make the switch because it's costly, and it's impossible to have somebody hired just for tech questions. So this is something to take into consideration also, because your allies are there, but they don't have the means. So we have to have a dialogue on how to make this shift of over 90% of enterprises and organizations towards your software. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just start with the first point that you raised about companies for social benefit. I think there, I'm going to use a word that will probably make some eyes roll, but we are in late stage capitalism, and we're seeing it in all of the products which we depend on. I made the joke about Microsoft Teams, but I'm actually very, very serious. That software is getting worse, objectively worse, because there is a profit incentive for it to get worse. The way that you imagine companies, your vision for it avoids that problem, because there is an incentive that comes before profit. And I think that is very important, and that I think is also at the heart of open source. People aren't going to make a pull request to make the product less good. Like that's the whole point. Nobody is going to write code to make the product less good, right? And so I think that's like an enormous benefit. But also, like, just to bounce back to the public procurement thing, public procurement is about a choice. Do we want to create jobs and sales in Europe for Microsoft or any other company in that area? Or do we want to create jobs for developers? Sovereignty is not just about procuring a product. It's also about having the expertise on your territory to build the things that you need. And I think that the way that we want to do it is the way that you build that expertise on your own territory. And so I think that's mega important. Second part, I tend to agree. I've worked for some SMEs in the past, and in my experience, the IT solutions that they have work 90% of the time. I also helped an SME migrate to Nextcloud, the community edition. It has been working almost flawlessly for them for 10 years now, and they've had a really, really good experience with it. It's also been cheaper. Now, it is not an enterprise solution. If there's a problem, they come to me. But in 10 years, they've come to me twice with a problem. So I do believe that there is that open source already offers, in many cases, the solutions. And not everybody can afford to have someone in-house, but there are still ways to make it work.
Hey, Alex? Short, please. We need to go on a coffee break.
I'll be very short. Actually, I see problem with logic. We started with a question from Florian that we have issue with vendor lock-in in procurement. And vendor lock-in, if you look at Microsoft or Google, the power of the lock-in is not in the algorithms or software, it's in data. So we look at Microsoft and Google, say, we want to fight with their power, we'll create better software, open source, whatever. Sorry, we should think about data. So if you want to take power from them, we should take data out of them. If you take data out of Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, etc., return to people, to organizations, to machines, by the way, Internet of Things, then we have situations that a user sitting in the government can use either today I use Microsoft, tomorrow I use Google to edit the same document. So if I have a situation when data is on the side of people, that's what we call data sovereignty, then we have no issue with choosing which applications the department will use. People will choose it themselves. So we don't have issue with vendor lock-in at all, and it opens a way for small, medium enterprises like our colleague said, so that I'm a small company, also making some nice application, well, use me. Then this person will take, okay, I take this application, use it with the same document, oh, it works well or not well. So we definitely open way for small, medium enterprise. So let's talk about not sovereignty of algorithms, let's talk about sovereignty of data. And it totally changed the whole thing. And by the way, whatever I just said, if we already implemented in Netherlands with Dutch government in agriculture, in city management, etc., it's not fantasy, it's being now implemented in Amsterdam.
I think it's quite good what you said about the part of the lock-in being in data, and I think part of the answer has already been given with the Data Act and with the possibility to have more cloud switching, and I think there is still room for improvement to correct that market failure that there is, and to also go against these anti-competitive bundling approaches that some of the actors are using, that we are seeing. And I think there is still a lot of power in regulation and in how the European Union can come in and make changes to that.
The data is irrelevant here.
Yeah, I also want to talk about, because when the Data Act helps for now, but going forward, I think what we need to do is to really think data as the first step. And the example of AI is perfect, because here open source AI can really be of benefit, because if we just have a contract, business has a contract with one of the large providers, all the data will flow to this provider to train the model. But if you install open source, an open source AI on your server, you can have control over your data, and it stays within your company. And it doesn't train the US company. You don't seem to agree, but we can discuss in the coffee break.
Anthony, you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So CISPE we changed a lot over the last 12 months, and thanks to a lot of our governance changes, we also took the decision as an organization to only go for European and open solutions. So at the moment, it took us a good 8 months to do it, but no employee within our organization is using anything but a European solution and an open solution. That is true for cloud, that is true for mailing, that is true for everything, all the way to our AI LLM that we want our employees to use, because now if you don't work using AI, it's a little old, I would say, entering 2026. So that was hard, but I guess where I'm going with this is related to what was said just before. Indeed, it's hard to do that without having on your payroll someone with technical knowledge. It's hard to do that. It's not impossible, but it's hard. I think it's a two-way street. If somebody advocates, for open solutions to be used by businesses and be bought by businesses, open source businesses also need to get better at support. But on the other hand, it's true. I think there is a responsibility when buying IT. I think often in Europe we have the culture of like, IT, it's those people that do the IT work over there, it's okay, we're going to subcontract it, we're going to give it to someone, and we didn't really realize, how much this was important, how much money we're spending on this, how much industry we built on this. So maybe it's, as I said, it's a two-way street. The open source businesses need to get better. They need to professionalize even more, and I think Sebastian here would even say that they've gone a long way already, and they're much better than they were 10 years ago. And Jordan, I'm sure you'd say the same. You mentioned Nextcloud 10 years ago, Nextcloud now, and Nextcloud before is very different technology, very different company. So I guess where I'm going with this is to say everybody should sort of do its work so that we can all rely on technologies that would have an impact on the market. I mentioned the Brussels effect for regulation, but I think everyone's decision as a society is also impacting where we go with our industry and what our industry looks like.
Yes.
So I think we've had two really opposing examples of regulation. We just talked about the Data Act and we talked about the Cloud Sovereignty Framework. the cloud sovereignty framework, I didn't really give my opinion, but to keep it short, you've heard the thing about giving enough monkeys typewriters, they'll write Hamlet. I think it's the same. If you give a company enough compliance people, there'll be sovereign cloud no matter what. So, there's this example where we develop something which is gameable and doesn't really positively impact us. Then there's the Data Act, which solves a concrete problem. It's not there yet, and I think that you're right, we probably need to do more. But that solves a concrete problem. And I think one of the big issues we have now as well is we're shying away from regulating. And that is a terrible, terrible mistake. Regulation can drive us forward. It can drive progress enormously. And just because we have a different president in the White House, just because some of the regulation that we've done in recent years hasn't been perfect, it does not mean we should stop. There are things that we can change that will improve Europe massively, and we should never shy away from doing that.
Thank you very much. So I would say Enzo and Jordan's closing comments were really good. So I already take them as closing comments, but I want to offer the opportunity to Florian and to Sebastian to say a few last words.
Thank you. It was mentioned more than enough now, the cloud sovereignty framework. I think it's not necessarily a bad approach. It creates some measurability. It is not perfect, but it's also not necessary to explicitly mention open source in there, because I think fundamentally digital sovereignty is only possible with open source because of the values and the freedoms that open source gives. And without open source, there can be no digital sovereignty.
Yes, fully agree. And I think we talked today a lot about the benefits of public procurement for the commons and for sovereignty. But I think public procurement can also be really a driver, not only of sovereignty and of resilience and of economic security and whatnot, but really of competitiveness. Because if we build up our own companies in Europe, they can go out, they can export, they can grow and create more jobs within Europe, keep the value, the data, everything within the EU. And we'll talk about this in about 2 weeks at our own summit, which I will not shamelessly promote, but just if you're interested, search online for Digital SME Summit. And fully agree with what has been said before. So, thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, all of you. And now let's go for a coffee break and meet here back at 11.
Thank you.
Now you can hear me. Yes, much better. So welcome everyone to the Commoners Funding Digital Commons. I'm Amandine Lepape from the Matrix.org Foundation and Element, and I will be moderating today's discussion. So today we're here to tackle one of the most critical challenges faced by digital commons, which are funding and sustainability. Digital commons, basically we can define them as community-governed digital resources, but they're pouring more and more of our digital infrastructure. So from the communication platforms that we use every day to the creative tools that enable digital artists, privacy-preserving app distribution channels, to secure whistleblowing platforms, these are all essential projects. Yet, despite their critical importance, many of these common projects operate on a shoestring budget. So they rely on volunteer labor a lot, sporadic grants, uncertain revenue streams, and these projects, as they scale to millions of users and become completely integrated into the core infrastructure, that we can't continue like this, right? It's not sustainable. The European digital ecosystem has made some commitments to support open source and digital commons in general, and they've done this through various funding mechanisms. For example, we can think of Horizon Europe or NGI funding. There are also national initiatives, also philanthropic foundations, like different things which have been put in place. But are these mechanisms truly meeting the needs for digital commons communities? What works? What doesn't work? What needs to change? And how can we ensure that the upcoming effort of the Digital Commons EDIC and the Open Internet Stack are going to actually be impactful? So today we have an exceptional panel of practitioners who lead successful digital commons projects. They will share their experience in navigating the funding space and the landscape in general, on how they've been building sustainable models and the real-world challenges of actually maintaining critical infrastructure through community-led projects. So let me introduce you to Francesco Sidi from Blender Studio, where he's serving as COO. He's overseeing the creation of the open movies and the development of one of the world's most successful open source creative tool. Hans-Christoph Scheiner, technical lead of FDroid, which is the privacy-focused free and open source Android app repository that many people know, I suspect, and who provides a crucial alternative to more corporate app stores. And Susanna Ferro, project manager at Global Leaks, an open source whistleblowing framework that protects sources and enables secure reporting worldwide. So let's dive into the discussion, and I will start with Francesco. So Blender has become one of the most successful open source projects in the creative software space. It has quite a unique funding model. It's built around the Blender Development Fund and the Blender Studios Open Movie projects. Can you share with us the journey to financial sustainability and kind of successes and challenges that you've encountered along the way? If there are any funding sources which have been most critical, and also particularly how European funding mechanisms have actually played a role in your path.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's the first time to have that I have this opportunity to actually share a little bit more about the Blender project formally. So that's very much appreciated. So first of all, I want to frame Blender a little bit more before we dive into the whole topic of the funding and the history and so on. So but Blender is a software for computer graphics, 3D content creation. And some of you might know it's a very popular open source software, and it's very inspiring for a lot of people to see the journey it has been through. It's been around since 2002. So I think a lot of people who know and care about open source, one way or another, have heard of the project. So working in computer graphics means being in a very innovative and fast-evolving space. And this touches upon many industries, from architecture, engineering and construction, automotive, medical and scientific research, education, media and entertainment. So it's so much more than just artists, because computer graphics are used for pretty much everything in every sector. And as a result, Blender also finds use in all those different places. And that's also what has made the growth of the project possible. And Blender is currently, I would say, the only really free and open source solution that can provide functionality at that level. And it kind of competes against software packages that cost like up to $10K a year for one single license, which is interesting. Also, Blender is not cloud-based. Blender is not internet-based. So when I read a lot of the tenders, a lot of the policies, a lot of the things that are being done, there is always like the internet or the cloud word in it, and I feel a little bit excluded. And I don't know, if it is something, I am misreading, or it is like I ask myself very often why there is like so much focus on the internet instead of simply the tools and the technologies. But that's like my own question. Maybe we can find an answer at some point. So Blender started with crowdfunding in 2002. It's probably the first software, like one of the very first internet crowdfunders in the history of the internet, where Blender raised $100K to become free and open source. It was a proprietary software company that was owning it, was going bankrupt, and then in order to buy the rights to actually release the software as open source, a crowdfunder was made with the community with 100K as a target. The target was achieved in a few weeks, and then Blender became open source. And ever since, it's been a journey to try and indeed find this sustainability. And for a long time, a lot of the development happened through this content creation, like content-driven development. So it means not just doing the paper feature or the support business, but to create setup projects. In this case, it was like creative production, short films that the community would fund in order to get the knowledge of how this was done, the production assets, to learn how this was done, but also to get improvements in the software. So it would set creative and technical targets. The community would donate and make that possible. This helped Blender to grow for over a decade. At some point, we switched and we added a new system, which is indeed the development fund. Started up very humble. It was like a few thousand, euros per year that we would get. And with time, and by being around and continuously improving, at some point, Blender started being used and recognized by industry players. So in 2019 or 20, Blender got a 1 million mega grant from Epic Games. And that turned a lot of heads, because the moment you say 1 million, everybody gets very excited. And that kind of kickstarted the dynamic of more and more of the relationship that we've been building over the years to come to fruition in the form of financial support from companies. Like today, Blender is supported by, Apple, NVIDIA, Intel, AMD, Google. It's been supported by Microsoft, like all the, big, tech companies that do see an advantage and an interest in supporting the Blender projects. And today, Blender works with around 4 million euro revenue per year. And so there has been like a significant growth. And when it comes to EU funding, the EU funding path, we have done a few Horizon applications, but it has been mostly very challenging, I have to say. And that challenge comes from, there are a lot of aspects to it, but mostly is the complexity of being able to access the funding and also like the fit of like what a project like Blender does compared to what the opportunities are out there for funding within the EU. So to kind of conclude on the topic, I think that sustainability it's an ongoing thing. So you could say that we have sustainability. There is still an interest in having growth. And that is a constant challenge. So there is no real sustainability per se. We try to achieve it by having the most diverse sources of income. So we rely on industry support, but of course, the other half of our funding comes from the community, from the people. And that's like individual and SMEs that actually support Blender by donating. So Blender is completely supported by donations and is really like split in half between like, very big corporate and independence, and then again like trying to get a little bit of more institutional funding. So it's kind of how we are doing this, and then next to that keeping the kind of creative projects happening as well, because that's also a source of income. So that's a little bit the picture with the Blender project.
Thank you, Francesco. Let me turn to Hans Christoph. So F-Droid operates in a critical but very often underfunded space. What are the specific funding challenges that you've met? Because you are on one hand essential infrastructure, but not necessarily have a traditional revenue model. How have you engaged with the European funding landscape so far? And are you considering diversifying your business model or go towards something more sustainable?
Hi, thanks for inviting me. So I'll start with just a quick background on F-Droid. It is like many projects on the internet in that people came together around an idea, around idealism, around activism, and said, this is how I want an app store to work. And so I have the skills. Let's find other people and build it. Just purely on our own time, no money. Often, in the beginning, it means paying money just for the servers and things like this to run it. And we still have that as core, and that's a really essential part of the project. Like, it's not something we want to, now that we have money that we don't need volunteers. Like, that would be a disaster. Because ultimately what this is about is building something like without compromise. Like, we want to say, this is how an app store should function, and we don't want to have a compromise on that. So what does that mean? So, the first years it was people coming along, and one person founded it with an idea saying, let's make a free software app store that also respects privacy here in Goodnix. Other people said, yeah, I want to help that. It grew from there. There was a donation link, hey, help me pay for servers, but this was a pretty minimal amount of money. Other people came along, contributed, it grew. Word spread, mostly, around the technical audience. I started also as a volunteer and was working on privacy software as funded by the Open Technology Fund and other U.S. government funders funding privacy work. So got some grants there, and that allowed us to make things more polished. And then that kind of rolled from there. We have a pretty steady stream of various grants. Like, we're on our first Horizon project, which was led by someone who knew how to do it. So we were insulated from most of that. Another key piece of this is NLNet, which is related to NGI. These are these small grants, relatively easy. I think F-Droid has gotten 5 or 6, and actually maps out quite well because we're not a centralized organization. So something like NLNet means one developer says, I want to work on this. They ask NLNet, they get funded directly. So that mostly worked or works. I mean, that is a core to how we work. But what changed in the last few years is as we started to get much bigger, the millions of users and global users, we're now saddled with all sorts of legal issues. We get requests for user information from law enforcement around the world. We get complaints about copyright and patent violations from around the world. We get competition authorities from around the world asking us to weigh in on their antitrust processes against Google and Apple. This is the kind of stuff that volunteers don't do. Like, handling when I get something from the New Delhi police saying I need to give user information, I'm like, I don't want to give my user information. And like, they ask for information on all of Telegram users, and I'm like, I don't want to give that, but does that mean I can't go to India? So we were very fortunate that the Open Technology Fund started a new fund they called Sustainability, which specifically funds us to figure out how to make it sustainable. And so we're literally now have people paid to figure out what is our legal strategy, to literally go through and talk to lawyers about what is our liability in India? Like, or what are the legal risks? Like, we want people to be able to volunteer in India too, and not be viewed as like an outlaw organization in India. Like, we try to respect the law in the world. Like, our goal is not to fight the law enforcement, but so this specific funding has been really a lifesaver to go through. We've talked to a lot of organizations that have already had bigger organizations that have worked through this, like VLC has been very informative to us, or many other, long list, I could list of people that have said, look, this is our experience. So there's two pieces. I think the two key pieces are that one hand, like on the technical side, volunteers can actually, when they believe in a project, can actually make it sustainable for millions of people. But of course, it's good to have paid people do that as well. But I don't want to discount that, volunteers can also do this when they feel like this is mine. On the other side, it functions in society, and there's things like all these legal issues. Once you hit a certain size, even if everyone's well-meaning and idealistic volunteers, you have to deal with hard things like the law around the world, like how like accounting, like when you can put up a link and get money donated, but if you get a few €1,000 a year to pay your server bills, then the accounting's not really a big deal. But we haven't done a fundraising campaign, but we're now getting many thousands, and so now we have to think, wait, what laws do we like? Who pays the taxes? Is there taxes? And this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive. So this is the stuff that to sustain an organization that I haven't seen another model that besides actually paying someone to do this. So that's where those are the two things. The volunteers can do it, but you do need to support them.
Thank you. That's really insightful. Global leaks, Susanna. It's pretty sensitive and critical information that you're dealing with. It's a function that we need in the world. We need to protect people who are stepping up, and we need to give the security for them to bring up the reports on the corruption and wrongdoings. It sounds like exactly the sort of things that public interest should be funding, right? It's pretty an obvious grant target, if we can say, and it should have a stable funding mechanism. I'm not sure this is actually the case. Do you want to share your experience with funding in general, the source you've accessed, the challenge you've faced, and maybe how the unique requirements of your work are actually affecting your funding strategy?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me today. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm really excited to talk about GlobalX. GlobalX actually an open source software for, as you said, whistleblowing, digital whistleblowing. So it was created 15 years ago, in 2011, following the case of some very famous and important whistleblowers like Julian Assange. And so some people, especially in Italy, because we are based in Italy and the project has begun, thought about the idea of having an open source software to protect people that want to speak up, that maybe are in a situation of danger and they risk their life to speak up. So they thought about having an open source software to protect the communication of this sensitive information, because as you said, especially in this field, it's really important to have a community check of the software, which is really important because we have so many in the marketplace, we have so many private software now dealing with about whistleblowing, but we cannot really actually see how they are made and see if they truly protect and they are really secure for the people that blow the whistle. So an open source software in this field is really important to ensure that these people can report safely. So the project was created 15 years ago, and for the first 5-6 years, there was the possibility to grow thanks to the investment of some private foundation or the Open Technology Fund. So the US had, so the investment of the funding supported by the US government. So that gave us a very important amount of money to start the research and the development of the software. And we keep on relying on some private foundation with minor investment in the middle of the in 2015-16, and that I have to say that that decade, the 2010-2020, was a really important period for whistleblowing, because even at the European level, it led to the approval of the European directive. So there was a lot of attention of this issue. There was a lot of attention from governments, from European institutions. So even from private foundation, they want to support civil society. So it was really important for us to start that project in that period, and that gave us the opportunity to have also some European funds to support our work, but small compared to the funds that we we had from private foundations, also like the Open Society Foundations, for instance. And so when we've had in 2015-16 the first prototype of the software that was starting to work and be used from some organization, we had the opportunity to create a social enterprise, which is called Whistleblowing Solution, and which is based in Italy but operates worldwide. And thanks to the creation of this social enterprise, we had the possibility to combine the development of the open source software and the providing of some services, because we start selling the software as a software as a service. So we give complementary services to the company and the public and private organization that want to use the software, and give us the sustainability to move on, because after the initial period where with a lot of foundation give us money to develop the project, then it stopped a little bit, because once you are in place, then you have to be sustainable by yourself. So that was the solution, that we have to make our project sustainable. And unfortunately, we cannot rely so much as you were saying on the donations, and that's a pity, because of course that could give us more flexibility sometimes. But I work in anti-corruption and transparency since 15 years, and having donations on these issues, it's really critical job because it's really difficult to have people engage on these topics, and so it's really difficult to get donations on that. We have some community users giving back to the project, what they actually, because some providers resell the software, and so they give it back to the project with some of what they earn. But I mean, most of our sustainability comes from the services, and this gives us the opportunity to maintain the software, the development of the software, and make some small improvements step by step. But if we want to scale up and maybe do more to add maybe some important components to the software, that's difficult, because we need maybe a huge donor that want to invest in our project. That's what we are doing right now, because we are collaborating with the National Anti-Corruption Authority in Italy, which is using the software, is one of the main authority at the European level investing on whistleblowing. And that's a really important thing on digital whistleblowing, actually, because also other authorities in Europe do their work on whistleblowing, but not on digital whistleblowing, which we believe is a very important part of whistleblowing. And for us to keep on going and to be sustainable, it's also important to
partner with other organizations in specific sectors, because the globalist software is useful if it is applied in some critical sectors like anti-corruption, or what we are trying to do right now, because anti-corruption is not maybe a priority as it was some years ago, maybe, but maybe there are also other critical topics, critical areas where a secure reporting platform can help, like, for instance, on gender issues, on migration issues. There are a lot of people leaving their situation at risk and need to report and to communicate with some organizations supporting them in a secure way. So we are trying to partner with this kind of organization to support them, because our goal is to support the organization to have secure communication systems. So that's mainly what we have done in this 15 years. And the one, if I don't know if I have still a couple of minutes, or I can do it later.
Maybe we can get
sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. And I think we'll, with the questions later, you'll be able to share. I'll just add just briefly the experience of Matrix, because it's yet another different setup that we've had here. So Matrix is an open standard for secure decentralized communications, basically open source technology that people can use to run their alternatives to Teams or WhatsApp and connect it to others, decide what they want to run it. It's mostly used by government these days. There is a big traction as everyone is trying to get their digital sovereignty. You may have heard of CHAP, for example, in the French government, also used in OpenDesk by the UN, and several trials ongoing within the European Commission itself. So the unusual setup we have is we created Matrix as an open source project as a team of 12 people incubated in a big company. And when we decided that we needed to be independent and we actually spun out the team, we had to first set up a commercial company to pay the team. And then, but we had to do this from day one. We had 12 people on the payroll. So we had to go and raise money from venture capitals and strategic partners like Automatic, who is behind WordPress, or Protocol Labs behind IPFS, and this sort of people. And then we set up the Matrix Foundation as an independent entity, not for profit, because Element is building Matrix products and selling Matrix services, but it cannot be the only vendor in the ecosystem if we want Matrix to be successful. So the foundation has to be independent and has to be financially independent from Element. So the foundation has been starting with donation, mostly from people who like the project. A couple of years ago, we set up a membership program for people who are using Matrix and want to support the project in general. And we haven't gone too much on, so we quickly became too big for NLNet projects. We had a couple of projects for Element in the beginning. There are a lot of smaller Matrix projects in the ecosystem got funded by NLNet. And we never looked at Horizon until a couple of weeks ago, because like Francesco, we were scared by the paperwork. So like, you need to manage a full consortium. It's going to be a 50-page document that you have to write up, reports, too many reports every month. Like, it's like too scary. We're already dealing with tenders from public sector, but that's going to be too complicated. And our main problem is not necessarily feature funding, because we're getting it a bit from some of the customers. But again, maintenance. How do we keep the protocols and the product secure? How do we make sure that they're maintained and they keep up to the level of the proprietary alternatives? High level, that's where we stand in terms of setup compared to the other organizations around the table. So let's get into the rest of the discussion. So the first thing I'd like to really take out is, what is the biggest challenge that we've been facing with funding, and what would an ideal funding architecture looks like for a project like yours? Francesco, maybe do you want to start with this one?
Yes, this could be a 5-hour panel just on the topic, but of course, I think you already touched upon the overhead is really, I think, the biggest challenge when it comes to funding, when it comes to the public funding, of course, because you're like, okay, the main challenge with funding in general is making sure you have your communication right, that the message reaches the right people. And that's like when you treat fundraising as, okay, I have to get money for myself, so I have to reach out to my users, I have to reach out to companies that are using the software. So that's like a thing, that's a topic of its own. But I want to kind of highlight that, then when you're looking for more institutional funding, then it's much different, because there are processes that you have to go through, and like there is this, as you said, paperwork that needs to be handled that makes it not practical sometimes for a project to do things. I want to make a couple of examples. One of them is what you could call forced collaboration. So we are an independent project, and we want to participate in. There is an opportunity to apply for some funding, and then we have to partner with like 2 or 3 other entities in Europe. We have to, otherwise we can't do it, and that is not practical for us sometimes, or most of the time, because it just dilutes the collaboration. Like it should be something that comes naturally. But forcing organizations to do that, I think it is counterproductive, in my opinion, and it makes it difficult. And then there is the topic of indeed finding the right size. So when your project in terms of funding reaches a certain level of escape velocity, like we recently tried to get some funding from NLNet, and it simply does not work. The scope of what we do, even if we try to scope it down, it doesn't resonate in terms of the reviews and in terms of like what we try to do. And then we cannot have access even to the most basic funding. So even if you apply for a grant of like 30, 50K, which, and given the overall revenue of the project is not much, for other people, this is life-changing amount of money that enables them to work and maintain something that has a broader impact. The little brick in the diagram of all these open source dependencies, like that's great. But for a project like Blender, that is out of reach. We cannot do that anymore. And then when you go for the other projects, also the amount of overhead that you need to go through is so big that it's sometimes easier for me to build a relationship of trust and mutual self-interest with the US companies than it is to achieve like funding from the EU programs. And those are the biggest challenges. And I think in a way the solution of how to do these things different or better is kind of also included in the challenge itself. I think simplicity should be one. Then I have further thoughts, but I want to let other people talk as well.
Thank you. Susanna, do you want to bring your...
Yeah, I completely aligned to the challenge of applying to EU funds, because we are a very small organization, just the 2 of us. So the possibility to apply to maybe coordinate if you want to do a project, it's impossible. So we need to partner, but partnering with other organizations, it's just a small amount of money that comes to us, and it's not sufficient to maintain a project like ours. So that's one of the difficulties we had with, for example, European projects. And as I was saying before, there is actually a little bit less interest in the field we are working on. So that was a problem with some foundations to have money. And so that led us to reshape a little bit our strategy for funding and trying to reach out to new sector, new type of organization to support different organizations working in different issues that are mainly maybe more on the priority of foundation, governments, and so on. So that's one of the challenges we are facing right now. And also, as I was saying before, our challenge is about communication, how to communicate the impact of the work we are doing to get back from users, from the community, from the people, to have support from donations. And that's one of the, as I was saying, we are a very small team, so we cannot do everything maybe in a proper way right now. So I hope we will grow, and we will have the capacity also to communicate it better and to engage more also the community also in this aspect. But we have just to give you an idea, we have more than 10,000 instances of Global X worldwide, and just a few of them give back to the project. So that's a problem because it is really widely used, and the support in terms of money and financial support is not. It doesn't come back to us. It comes back from the point of view of the development of the software, because we have a very active community of users who contribute to the development, and so that's a lot. But to do things, we also need to be more sustainable on this aspect.
Thank you, Hans-Christoph.
So I've lived most 90% from grants since 2009, and this is something I did not ever thought I would do. It's not something I directly pursued, so I have a kind of unusual journey. I mean, at this point now, I'm used to it, but and so people ask you how do you do it? Well, I was in the right place at the right time, ready to. I was lucky to be in a bar with Dan Meredith, who was like, I'm going to start this crazy fund. But it's luck. I mean, so it's hard to give the best advice. But the one thing there's some clear patterns, which I think now, so I spend a fair amount of my time, and actually we try to do this organizationally, volunteer time to coach other people how to get grants. So when we say, hey, you're doing cool work, do you want to try and get some money from it? We'll help you with the process. And so now what I see, I've been funded from so many different sources, and what they say I can echo all of what they both said. But I guess the key point I want to make here is that it seems like there needs to be, from my point of view, if there could be a path through these. So something like NLNet is great because it's small, it's relatively easy. You can ask for 5K, you can get started. Then the amount of work you have to do is not so much, in terms of reporting. It's there. So that's a coaching point, but and then something like now I'm on a Horizon project. I'm like, okay, it's great, 3-year focus, big amount of money. Sure, there's bureaucracy, but now at this point we're used to it. But there isn't really, so in the general EU landscape, there isn't something between, right? There's if you can get private money from companies, but that's kind of, I don't know, there's not really a process. You can't say they don't have an open call, hey, Google, give me money. Oh yeah, you go to that forum and put in a proposal. So what I see is that I think it would be quite helpful if we want people to build organizations. There needs to be kind of an incubator process, and use a startup term. NLNet provides this great first step, but then there's this huge gap, between NLNet and getting something like private foundation money, getting money from large corporations, getting money from Horizon, which is, that is a huge step. So one example, which I think is really great, is Sovereign Tech Fund from Germany. And they really are, I think the way they're doing it is that gap, but it's Germany focused, and I think that could be broader.
Yeah, thanks. I was about to bring the Sovereign Tech Fund. I don't know if you need to meet the mic. I know that there is some discussions, or at least mention of trying to get potentially a European EU-focused Sovereign Tech Fund equivalent. So that could fill the gap. You do get a bunch of sponsorship for the development, etc. How do you manage to keep how do you manage the governance of this revenue, and how do you manage to keep the independence of the project when you're getting paid to do things?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things we're really wrestling now. Now we're getting to the point where we have to, the amount of money that we're bringing in is bigger enough that we need to have more of process. Up until now, it's mostly been on. I mean, it's a community with community rules. We mostly operate on rough consensus. That means, we try to achieve a consensus, but we won't let a veto block us, like one single veto kind of thing. So that process, I think, has mostly worked in that, it's pretty low overhead. Like we're a small group. We talk to each other. We trust each other. But that doesn't. As the stresses get higher and the liabilities and the money gets higher, then so we're trying to codify this. And this is, again, this OTF Sustainability Fund. It's like we're funded to figure this out, and I'm like, this is just kind of blowing my mind. This is the first year they've done this, because I'm used to okay, funders are all like, what's your new technology development? I'm like, great, that's good. I know how to do that. But then when you hit a certain point, and we're like, yeah, we would love more money to develop projects. We have all sorts of ideas. We know we have a track record of delivering, but all of these kind of how do you make an institution out of it things, it's like, well, you're supposed to figure that out. So this is I don't know. I think it's a great example, and we'll see how it goes. It's only, I think they've done 1 year funding for it.
Okay, thank you. Susanna, how do you deal with that side? Like when you get sponsorship, keep the independence, how do you manage the governance behind it?
I give you the example of what we are doing for in this period with the National Anti-Corruption Authority, because we are having a lot of money from them to develop the software in line with what they need also. And our management of this funding and the development of the software is by being completely transparent. We actively engage with our community every week to explain everything, every requirements we have been asked to develop. We share with the community, we ask for their feedback, and we do everything that is approved and is in line with what the community of users needs. So, and also we are very clear with our funder, because they don't want to, they want an open source software. So even if they want some customized feature, something that is really, that just maybe they really need, we say, okay, we can do that, but only if it's in line with what the community need, and because otherwise you have to do a fork of the software, and you don't want to do that. It happens in the past years that they have to develop their custom software, and then they had problems because they didn't have the advantage of the development of the open source one. So they know that everything we do has to be approved by the community, and so we try to balance every interest and to be fair with everyone, and to develop something that is really helpful for everyone, starting from the need from maybe one specific actor, but that's what we actually do. Also because we have really a very large community. For instance, in Italy, again, we have more than 6,000 public administrations using the software. So we have to be accountable to them and to do something that is in line with their needs. So we cannot afford to do something that is just reflecting the needs of one funder.
Okay, thank you. And Francesco, how does it work on your side?
Just very quickly, we do roadmap aligned development. We, as in a roadmap aligned funding. So make sure that, what we communicate what we want to do, and make sure that the funding comes with no strings attached as much as possible. Communicate transparently with the community. We do annual reporting. We do weekly reporting on the development targets. Very similar. I think that it's fairly common for every open source project to do these kind of things, and there is an ethos of disclosing and being open about what is happening. That's how you keep the trust of your community, and that's how you can successfully combine more quote institutional or corporate funding with individual donations. Because the moment you start to erode the trust, then individuals will not feel so much like I'm supporting you, and that is really a big point. And sometimes it comes at a cost. You cannot develop some things, or you have to turn down large sums of money. But then you don't even have to make a big fuss about it. You just, because overall in the long term, this pays off. So that's it.
Cool, thank you. So looking at the kind of output I wanted from this, I think we've got a lot of what I was expecting, but maybe what I'd like to do is get at least one question from the audience just to see if there is something we missed in what we've been discussing. Just one question in case because of the time. And yeah.
So yesterday we were hearing a lot about needing more VC for open source. We've heard you all talk about a lot of other models. I'm curious about another model that might be possible, which would be public sector impact investing. So impact investing is you're getting loans to do something, but it's going to be at a lower interest rate than you can get from a traditional bank without the expectations of what VCs have for like 10x returns. And if done by a public institution, you know, they can justify that when they have the capital to do it. They create the capital, and the interest is in helping the economy. I'm curious if something like that were to exist, would it have been useful to any of your projects?
Thank you. Anyone wants to start?
I would never take a loan because how can I pay it back? I make free software, and unless you want me to then build a business that then is going to get revenue, that then I can pay the loan back, then I'm not making free software anymore. I am making a service business or a commercial business, which there is nothing wrong with. And I think that there are a lot of maybe economic, like that's what I see a lot of incentives to do this. And it's good, but like I think it really detracts from then focusing on making a great product, and especially when you're like in this highly competitive. This is speaking for Blender, because I think that in other cases this might make sense. If you're building like infrastructure stuff, like telecommunication, cloud, like those kind of things, you have to offer convenient services, you have to sell them, you have to do things, and the amount of R&D that you can do, of course, it's there. Like in my case, it's so much about that. That if you want to give that innovation to people, that's not something you will ever be able to sell. And so, like, you know, from a project like Blender's perspective, that I don't think would be very effective.
Yeah, we have. I mean, our capital expenditures are almost nothing. So a loan just seems like a scary thing.
No, yeah, I agree. Something we never considered, actually.
Yeah, basically, like Francesco said, if you have a proper business behind it, then that's probably something you can look at, but that would be a limitation otherwise.
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing? Because you said we have unique cases, but we are all here. So I think that maybe there are even more unique cases. And I think that that's an interesting aspect about, again, as I was saying, about this model, because then by creating these mechanisms, then you are pushing projects to pursue those models so that they can get some funding. So I think that it's actually something interesting to think about that maybe is not so unique.
So the thing is, like, yeah, from the Matrix Foundation perspective, taking a loan is complicated. Unless, like, once we get the membership going regularly, etc., and we can set other revenue streams. So thinking about certification, for example, if you want to say, I speak Matrix, then you can go to us, and that's something we're looking at. From the Element perspective, which is an open source business, then it makes more sense, because then you are building a business model, you produce open source software, and you're building a business model, and then you have a plan for growth, etc. So yeah, it's open source companies could potentially look at these sort of things. If you're looking at foundations, it's a bit more complicated, and unless they've managed to put in place a proper revenue stream.
I would just throw in taking the F-Trade hat off and just being involved in free software for 30 years. I think your idea is definitely worth trying. I can't say that I know an organization that would take it, but I think it highlights what we want is a diversity of approaches, because if we have if the funding structures will be reflected in the organizations as well. And if we're looking for, I feel like diversity came up before, if we were looking for a diversity of organizations, there needs to be different funding structures. Otherwise, yeah.
Thank you. So I think it's about time to conclude. So I'd like to recap a bit the things we've been touching on. We talked about the gaps between what the role of critical infrastructures, the role of digital commons in the digital infrastructure, and the gap with the funding realities. I think the main points have been that we need, the projects actually need some recurring funding for both the maintenance, but also things we don't think necessarily about, which are more of the legal, like the overheads. So how do you deal with the legal, the finance, etc.? Especially when you get to a certain size, you have some responsibility to maintain. And it's pretty clear that the amount of usage of an open source project really translates into high revenue for the foundation behind it. Looking at success and challenges with the European funding mechanism, there are two angles to it. One of this is some things like Horizon are pretty complex to deal with when you are potentially a group of volunteers working on a given project. Also, the fact that there's been quite a gap between NNNet type and Horizon projects. Funding mechanisms. Some solutions like the European Sovereign Tech Fund may be able to fit into it. We need to see what the Digital Commons edict comes up with as well, because I think one of the role is to also help funding these maintenance and potentially at levels which fill a gap basically for Digital Commons. And forcing collaboration between organizations sometimes is also a bit of a barrier. In terms of the need for long-term sustainable funding that also respects the community governance, everyone here I think is pretty aligned that the key to do that is transparency, provide the report to your community, make sure that the funding you get is independent, no strings attached, aligned with the roadmap you had in mind. So keep control. You need funding, but you still need control over the project, and you still need to make sure it is aligned with what the community is looking for. So the other things which we haven't necessarily touched on, but I'd like to bring to the table, I guess it's part of the fact that the usage doesn't translate into revenue. Something we feel pretty strongly from the Matrix side is that buying open source better is also a solution. So beyond just doing and bringing funding and grants and this sort of things, if everyone who has the mean for it and is profitable is using funding and can bring something to the table, that would be pretty life-changing for the projects themselves. And from a public sector perspective, when you buy open source, then buy it from someone who is actually supporting the project. It's very simple. It's just a one-liner in the tenders and can really, really make a difference when the projects and the businesses are trying to fight the freeloading, who are coming on the same tenders with your own product and completely price dumping because they don't have the cost to support for it. And the other thing is supporting when we're building regulations, something we didn't necessarily touch on, but we touched on preparation, potentially ensuring that there is some level of support to help the open source and digital commons to actually implement the regulations. Could be helpful. That's it. Thank you, panelists, for coming over, for your insight and sharing your experience. Hopefully we can continue the conversation online and in person here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We're getting closer to the end, and I would like to wrap up with a few remarks. First of all, before we close, I would like to thank all of you, the participants that came yesterday and couldn't be with us today, the participants online, all the moderators, DG Connect for hosting us, our officer Dimitris that has done an amazing work in supporting the whole agenda, the whole logistics. Thanks a lot, Dimitris. But I would also like to spend a few words about the learnings, and I will give the floor first to Carolina, that has been moderating the session this morning, to Amandine for the last remarks, if she wants to reiterate anything, and then on behalf of Susanna, that has been moderating a couple of sessions yesterday, I made a brief recap also of my session, and I will give final words. So Carolina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm sure you were all here, you remember what we discussed, but I really want to highlight what the speakers have sort of agreed upon. So basically, we followed up on the notion of yesterday that, supporting or like using digital commons is not a question of if, but how, and on the need to deliver results. And we have sort of taken the approach to the session that we had as public procurement as a method to deliver the results that were called for yesterday. So if public procurement is the solution, what can it be a solution for? The speakers suggested that public procurement should and can serve as a solution for sovereignty, for competitiveness, and for digital skills on the European territory. When discussing the public procurement directive revision to be able to achieve those goals, the speakers have agreed to define criteria for European preference, to sort of leave the notion of the best price, to call for interoperability of the solutions when preparing the tenders, and also to allow for federated and integrated solution. Because we have said that the diversity of players and the small SMEs, digital commons, open source developers and providers are the strength of Europe. And, when we use them and when we use open source as a tool to help federate and join these projects, these developers, these cloud providers, we can increase our competitiveness. So we have agreed to use public procurement as an industrial policy tool, as a tool of the Brussels effect. If we do this, we can not only change the market, but we can also change the world.
So yeah, I think everyone has been agreeing that digital sovereignty is nothing without digital commons. It's about resilience, it's about freedom of choice, but it can only work if these commons are actually sustainably supported. So we need this because we need the commons to stay secure. We need them to be evolving, to stay table stakes with the proprietary alternative and basically stay usable for the users. I don't believe that the entirety of the financial burden should be on the shoulder of the public sector when so many organizations are using it. And I think we all agreed earlier that the diversity of funding is also one way to make sure these commons are nicely supported. We need support from the public sector angle for kickstarting small projects. We need it to actually enable the innovation, big R&D funding, and this sort of things. That's definitely helpful. But once you get to a given size and the digital commons are used by industries and many big profitable organizations, we need these people to put the food where the mouth is. It can come via regulation. We could force them to do so. But as I was basically saying earlier, can also come by showing by example when public sector actually buys digital commons, make sure that there is a mandate for support of the open source and the digital commons behind it. It's definitely something we need to raise awareness from, and starting in this room with a lot of policymakers is a good place to start. But we need to really push the message to the entirety of the industry, including private sector.
Thank you very much. So I feel like I should say a few words about also what has happened to give you the context of this initiative, because it goes back also to recognize what's going to come next. So here I see two persons that are representing the Next Generation Internet Unit. I see Jean-Luc Dorel, I see Dimitris, our PO. And I think a lot of discussions I heard bring me back to many memories, many learnings along the path, right? So there are other ways for public funding to fund innovation and to fund also community-driven innovation and to fund grassroots initiatives. And the Next Generation Internet Initiative has been one of those. We have more than 1,500 projects, all open source, all based in Europe, that have been supported. And of course, there are different levels of maturity that these innovations have reached along the course of the years. How to move forward, how to sustain the efforts, I think, is a very crucial aspect that emerged throughout the discussion of the 2 days. But I think there is a clear commitment on continuing to support this kind of innovation. And it's also clear, has emerged from the discussions, that there is a need to close the gap between high-level policy initiatives and grassroots community-driven work. Public procurement is an important instrument. It has to change the way it works. There are many ways in which it could change. We need to start from somewhere. And I think the session this morning was very rich in that respect. I also very much appreciated the session that Amandine was leading. I was identifying myself as an entrepreneur in several of the points that Susanna and others made, Francesco, about how difficult it can be for small players to undertake the digital commons path because there is often a lack of education. We didn't discuss that so much, I think, in this couple of days, this problem. But digital skills and the lack of skills in dealing with open source and digital commons kind of framework is a reality. And it is also a reality that we cannot, as entrepreneurs, just plan for hiring new people when we're lacking those kind of skills. So that's a sort of a chicken and egg situation. So I think it's very important to come back also to other points that have been made yesterday that are about providing fiscal incentives, tax credits, to sort of create an overall environment in which also for smaller and private organizations, it's easier to make the digital commons choice when there is this choice. Of course, what comes first is the possibility to have a choice. Yesterday we discussed with several of our panelists that sovereignty at the end of the day boils down to have freedom of choice. This freedom has a cost. We are happy that there will be further investments along this direction at European level. At least we know that the DG and the Digital Commons EDIC and the Open and Internet Stack initiatives will be there to keep on accompanying efforts that are at the core of this autonomy. Whether this is enough or not, we can already anticipate the answer. It's never enough. But on the other hand, I think it's very important that we have gathered here a community that I hope will grow. And for me, I noted down what would be great is that leaving this summit, we sort of take away, I was thinking about 3 aspects. What's the next slide? No? I see signs and they are... Okay. before I get there, I wanted to finish what I was saying. That is, I would like that, according to our different role in the innovation ecosystem, in the policy-making ecosystem, in the financing ecosystem, we take away a few keywords. And I think interoperability, federation, openness, trustworthiness are at the core of all we discussed. I think that you have many experts here that will be able to show you the way in which it can happen. So the work is ongoing. This was a first appointment. This was the first edition of this Digital Commons Policy Summit. We will be back next year. We still don't know exactly when, but there will be a further edition. If you're interested in our initiatives, in our activities, please follow up. We have 4 main streams ongoing. You can go to the NGI Commons website and you will find many ways in which you can interact with us. We have a digital commons task force that Carolina is managing, and that gathers experts, and we discuss every 2 weeks on specific topics of relevance that help us shaping the road mapping that we will deliver to the Commission at the end of our project. So please stay tuned. Whatever you have learned, please share it with us. Any feedback is more than welcome. And unless I forgot anything, I don't see any more signs. Again, many thanks to all of you for coming here. I hope you have a good and safe trip back. No drones flying around, hopefully. And so take care and all the best. Thank you.